round 3 of recording this video. I keep like getting a cough attack or something. At least I have some tea. So I'm still trying to like experiment with this channel and see what works. So let me know if this book interests you. I've been reading a lot of fairy tales lately. This one is going to be more non-fiction, historical. It says The Wisdom of the Native Americans. It's a compilation of quotes compiled and edited by Kent Nurburn. So let me know if this interests you at all. Where is it? I might as well read the first one. So it says, let us put our minds together and see what kind of life we can make for our children. So I got this book way back in, well, not way back, I suppose. Well, I guess it is, because I got it in 2014 and it's 2024 now, so it's literally 10 years. It's a bit old and I haven't really opened it up since then, and it's still I tried to make this video 3 times and the pages are still flopping open. Yeah, so this is the contents of the book. I like the little on the edge here, the border designs. I like when they do that, like when people put like a pattern on the edge of the pages. But yeah, this is the contents, so I'll read them, and if any of this is interesting to you, then I'll come back and read some more of it. So it says, Part 1, The Ways of the Native Americans, the ways of the land, the ways of words and silence, the ways of learning, the ways of living, the ways of leading others, the ways of the heart, the ways of believing, the betrayal of the land, the ways of dying, the passing of the ways of the white man, the ways of civilization. Heed these words. And then part 2, the soul of an Indian. Forward, the ways of the spirit, the ways of the people, the coming of the white ways, and the wisdom of the great chiefs. So that's Chief Red Jacket, Chief Joseph, Chief Seattle. So that's the contents. You pause or whatever, but please put in the comments if any of that interests you, so then I can know what to do for this channel. These pages keep opening. So I'll just start reading the introduction. I don't know how long exactly it is. Sometimes books have like a really quick introduction, and then sometimes they're quite long. See if I can make all that in one video. So it says, in 1492, Columbus and his crew, lost, battered, and stricken with dysentery, were helped ashore by a people he described as, quote, neither black nor white, fairly tall, good-looking, and well-proportioned. Believing he had landed in the East Indies, he called these people Indians. In fact, they were part of a great population that had made its home on this continent for centuries. Get some more tea. The inhabitants of this land were not one people. Their customs differed. Their languages differed. Some tilled the earth, others hunted, and picked the abundance of the land around them. They lived in different kinds of housing and governed themselves according to differing rules. But They shared in common a belief that the earth is a spiritual presence that must be honored, not mastered. Unfortunately, Western Europeans who came to these shores had a contrary belief. To them, the entire American continent was a beautiful but savage land that it was not only their right but their duty to tame and use it as they saw fit. As we enter the 21st century, Western civilization is confronting the inevitable results of this European-American philosophy of dominance. We've gotten out of balance with our Earth, and the very future of our planet depends on our capacity to restore the balance. We are crying out for help, for a grounding in the truth of nature, for words of wisdom. That wisdom is here, contained in the words of the native peoples of the Americas. But these peoples speak quietly. Their words are simple and their voices soft. We have not heard them because we have not taken the time to listen. Perhaps now the time is right for us to open our ears and hearts to the words they have to say. Unlike in many traditions, the spiritual wisdom of the Native Americans is not found in a set of scriptural materials. It is, and always has been, a part of the fabric of daily life and experience. One of the most poignant reflections of this spiritual message is found in their tradition of oratory. Traditionally, Indians did not carry on dialogues when discussing important matters. Rather, each person listened attentively until his or her turn came to speak, and then he or she rose and spoke without interruption about the heart of the matter under consideration. This tradition produced a measured eloquence of speech and thought that is almost unmatched for its clarity and simplicity. Indian reasoning about governmental and social affairs was also carried on with the same uncompromising purity of insight and expression. It is from these orations, recorded observations of life and social affairs, and other first-person testimonies that the materials for this book have been drawn. The wisdom has been available for some time, but much of it has been recorded only in imposing governmental documents and arcane academic treatises. Nailed that word. The wisdom of the Native Americans gathers 3 of New World Library's volumes of Indian oration into one collection. In addition to the short distilled passages of Native American wisdom, a smaller volume I compiled with Louise Mengelkopf. This book includes the thoughts of one of the most fascinating and overlooked individuals in American history, Ohiesa, also known by the anglicized name of Charles Alexander Eastman. Ohiesa was at heart a poet of the spirit and the bearer of spiritual wisdom. To the extent that he dared, and with increasing fervor as he aged, he was a preacher for the native vision of life. It is my considered belief it is his spiritual vision above all else that we of our generation need to hear. We hunger for the words and insights of the Native American, and no man spoke with more clarity than Ohiesa. Ohiesa was born in southern Minnesota, in the area now called Redwood Falls, in the winter of 1858. He was a member of the Dakota or Sioux Nation. When he was 4, his people rose up in desperation against the U.S. government, which was systematically starving them by withholding provisions and payment they were owed from the sale of their land. When their uprising was crushed, more than 1,000 men, women, and children were captured and taken away. On the day after Christmas in 1862, 38 of the men were hanged at Mankato, Minnesota, in the greatest mass execution ever performed in the U.S. government, by the U.S. government. Those who were not killed were taken to stockades and holding camps, where they faced starvation and death during the icy days of the northern winter. Ohiesa's father, Many Lightnings, was among those captured. Ohiesa was among those left behind, was handed over to his uncle to be raised in the traditional Sioux manner. He was taught the ways of the forest and lessons of this people. He strove to become a hunter and warrior. Then one day while he was hunting, he saw an Indian walking toward him in white man's clothes. It was his father who had survived the internment camps and had returned to claim his son. During his incarceration, Many Lightnings had seen the power of the European culture and had become convinced that the Indian way of life could not survive within it. He despised what he called reservation Indians, who gave up their independence and tradition in order to accept a handout from the European conquerors. He took Ohiesa to a small plot of farming land in eastern South Dakota and began teaching him to be a new type of warrior. He sent him off to white schools with the admonition that it is the same as if I sent you on your first warpath. I shall expect you to conquer. Thus was born Charles Alexander Eastman, the Santee Sioux, child of the woodlands and prairies who would go on to become the advisor to presidents and an honored member of New England society. Ohiesa, or Eastman, went to Beloit College, where he learned English and immersed himself in the culture and ways of the white world. Upon graduation, he went east. He attended Dartmouth College and was accepted into medical school at Boston University, which he completed in 1890. He returned to his native Midwest to work among his own people as a physician on the Pine Ridge Reservation, but became disenchanted with the corruption of the U.S. government and its Indian agents. After a short-lived effort to establish a private medical practice in St. Paul, Minnesota, he turned his focus back to the issue of Indian-white relations. For the next 25 years, he was involved in various efforts to build bridges of understanding between the Indians and non-Indian people of America. He worked first for the YMCA, then served as an attorney for his people in Washington, then returned to South Dakota to spend 3 years as a physician for the Sioux at Crow Creek. I'm going to get some more tea. In 1903, he went back to Massachusetts and devoted himself to bringing the voice of the Indian into American intellectual arena. He became deeply involved in the Boy Scout program, believing it was the best way to give non-Indian American youth a sense of the wonder and values that he had learned growing up in the wild. Eventually, with the help of his wife, he established a camp of his own in New Hampshire, in which he tried to recreate the experience of Sioux education and values for non-Indian children. But financial troubles and fundamentally irreconcilable differences between Indian culture and white civilization ultimately took their toll. In 1918, he and his white wife separated, and in 1921 he left New England for good. He continued to believe that the way of civilization was the way of the future, but he had lost much of his faith in its capacity to speak to the higher moral and spiritual vision of humanity. He returned again to his native forest of the Midwest, devoting more time to his traditional ways, often going into the woods alone for months at a time. But he never ceased believing that the two cultures that had clashed so tragically on the soil of the American continent somehow had to become one if there was ever to be a true America with an honest and indigenous soul. Even though he had come to believe that white civilization was at heart a system of life based on trade, he still felt that it was the task of the best people both Indian and non-Indian, to help America find a shared vision. And he said at the end of his autobiography, "From deep woods to civilization, I am an Indian, and while I have learned much from civilization for which I am grateful, I have never lost my Indian sense of right and justice. I am for development and progress along social and spiritual lines, rather than those of commerce, nationalism, or efficiency. Nevertheless, so long as I live, I am an American." As an observer of Indian life, Ohiesa was unlike any other. He was at once completely secure in his Indian identity, yet gave himself over completely to the search for meaning within the context of a European America. He tried with his whole heart and spirit to believe in the wisdom of each of the ways he had learned. If there was struggle, it was because the two ways coexisted so uneasily within one person. Though he lamented the passing of the Indian ways, he accepted it as the workings of the great mystery, and set himself to the dual task of bringing the ways of the whites to the Indians and the ways of the Indians to the whites. He never lost his grounding in his traditional ways, even while exploring the intricacies of the Christ ideal. And dining with presidents, he was ever the observer, journeying ever deeper into the ways of white culture, trying, as his grandmother had always instructed him, to follow a new trail to the point of knowing. The writings he has left are the documents of that journey, crafted by a man with a warrior's heart and an orator's tongue, and human spirit of such dignity that it transcends boundaries of race and belief. Like much of the material here, the third part of this volume, the great speeches of Chiefs Red Jacket, Joseph, and Seattle, is best approached with an understanding of the Indian oral tradition these speeches represent. Most of us are trained to read with our minds. We pass over words, compressing them into ideas, and we use these ideas as the measure of our understanding. But there is another way to read, where the words themselves take on a life of their own, and the rhythms and cadences open a floodgate of images and sympathies, until we feel the heartbeat of the author and sense the lifeblood of experience that they contain. It is a way of reading that is more akin to listening to music, where the sheer power of the sound can move the hearer to tears. This is the way that we should read these great speeches. Like the insistent beat of ceremonial drums, the words weave a hypnotic spell, and the passion of their vision enters into the hearts as well as the minds of their listeners. These speeches are the songs of the spirit of great men who spoke for a great people. And in their words, between their words, beneath and above their words, is the love, the faith, the anger, and the pathos of people who believed in the ways of their ancestors and could not make these ways understood to the European settlers who were so intent upon changing them. Today the battle is over. This continent is, at least on the surface, a distant mirror of the European continent, controlled in its shape and direction by the descendants of the Europeans who were once raw immigrants on its shores. But the spirit of the native people, the first people, has never died. It lives in the rocks, in the forests, in the rivers, and in the mountains. It murmurs in the brooks and whispers in the trees. The hearts of these people were formed of the earth that we now walk, and their voice can never be silenced. The three speeches gathered here give us a chance to hear that voice again. The selection of these particular speeches was made with care and love. I could have chosen more, I could have chosen otherwise, but these three, each imbued with its own individual genius, worked together in a way that it almost transcended in its poignancy and beauty. Red Jacket's speech shows us the strength and faith of the traditional way and stands like an oak against the coming storms of the European. Chief Joseph's speech takes us along the journey of a people from free, loving, hopeful children of the land to a fugitive remnant pursued through forests and mountains, into a tragic submission on the windswept foothills of the Rockies. Chief Seattle's speech begins as an eloquent eulogy to the Indian people, but soon rises to become an admonition to us all, and a bonding together of the Indian and non-Indian into a common fate. In the course of the three, we are carried along from the sunrise hopes of the native peoples, as they offered the hand of friendship to a new and foreign visitor, to the sunset of their dreams as this visitor grew in number and in strength and betrayed the friendship which he had been met, to the dawning of a new era in which we all must learn the lessons of the native people if we are to live honorably upon this land we all now share. These are wise men. They have much to teach. If we listen carefully with a good heart, they may teach us. I hope so, for we as a nation still have much to learn. Kent Norburn. So that's the introduction. And that would be part 1.